It's a pleasure for me to introduce a friend of mine, Ray Zinn. Ray is president and CEO of Micrel, which is one of the semiconductor firms in the Valley. He's going to tell us a little bit about his life experience and how that's intertwined with his company. And Ray is an inspiration and has been a mentor to me over the past several years. He holds 11 patents, is very active with developing intellectual property. And I hope you'll join me in welcoming Ray Zinn.
Last time I was here was about 19 years ago when I had a problem with my vision, and the medical ophthalmology group looked at me. I had 60 doctors. I think probably the whole group here was looking at my eyes. I couldn't figure out why I needed so many people staring at me. I hope they learned a lot because it was a difficult time for me. I was excited about this new industry called semiconductors. The technology, of course, was very in its very infant stage. Processes we use were all being actually innovated and developed, much like what you're trying to do here at UCSF. You know, you're trying to develop and enhance the technology associated with the medical field. And there's less than a handful of semiconductor companies at the time in the U.S. Issue associated with this technology is that it was trying to replace vacuum tubes. And vacuum tubes were the way the electronics were originally done. So the functions were very immature. We could do maybe one electrical function. At the time I joined the industry in 1963. Technology today, of course, is imaged on these wafers, these silicon wafers, and we now have tens of millions of functions, electrical functions that we can do on a single chip, and sometimes the industry is referred to as a chip industry. And now today, you know, semiconductor technology can be found in nearly every single system that we have, electrical system that we have. When I started Micrel, this was back in 1978, and the industry, of course, wasn't that old, and so I was in at the very early stages. My last job I had, which was designing and building semiconductor equipment to manufacture these products, my boss told me that I really shouldn't work for anybody, that I was that kind of a rebel that really should go out and form my own company. I went home one night after a visit with my boss and told my wife that I was not going to work for anybody again, that I was going to work for myself. And she said, okay, no problem. What are you going to do? And I said, I don't know, but I'll figure it out. In July 1976, I left my company, Electromask, started the formation of Micrel. So from 1976 to present, no one assigned my paycheck except me. It was just myself and another fellow. We literally a garage operation. I know you've heard this before, how these companies started in a garage, but that's what I did. I didn't want to be venture funded, so most semiconductor companies are venture funded. And the reason for that is because it takes a considerable amount of money, somewhere between $20 and $50 million to start a semiconductor company. Well, I didn't want to be venture funded, and I didn't have $20 or $50 million. The most I could round up was about $300,000 of private equity of myself primarily, along with my partner, and then we had to secure some bank debt. The problem is that banks don't fund technology startups because they're too risky. Banks don't like to loan to companies that lose money. So most semiconductor companies, when they start up, or most technology companies, are companies that are funded by venture groups, which have a 5-year window, meaning that they expect you to get up and running, and then, of course, either go profitable or be acquired in that 5-year window. In my case, because of the fact that I started with $300,000, which is a fraction of what most semiconductor companies start with, it was necessary for me to go and get this bank financing. Well, the banks, again, didn't want to do it, and I said, well, what would it take for you to fund a startup that's got $300,000. To make a long story short, the bank said, no, we don't want to do it. And I said, well, pretend you would do it. Just act like you would be interested in doing it, and tell me what it would take for my education. What would it take for me if you were to do a startup in this industry? So they listed these onerous requirements for me to meet, covenants, and when I came back and they explained it to me, I said, okay, I accept it. Where do I sign? And they said, well, wait a minute. We didn't say that we would fund you. And I said, well, but you did say that this is what it would take to do it. And they said, yeah, that's true. And I said, okay, and I agree. Well, you won't succeed. And I said, well, why would you make them so I wouldn't succeed? And so then we began to negotiate on reducing the covenants to a point where at least I had a chance of succeeding. But they were very onerous. They were very, very difficult. For example, the primary one that was hard was the fact that I had to be profitable every year. Remember, most semiconductor companies will go through $20 million in 5 years. So here I'm to be profitable from day one. Starting from the moment I opened the door up, I had to be profitable. That required a different mindset, a different philosophy in how to run a company. But what I wanted to do was form a unique company where every employee became an entrepreneur. So I had this entrepreneurial spirit, whereas, hey, we can make it happen, we can do it. All we need to do is understand the principles of how you run a successful company, which means you run it profitably from the day one. You don't just spend money for the sake of just trying to get the venture guys out of the investment. So that's what I did. Is I got a group of people that were employees that were willing to work, 24/7. They're willing to put in the effort and time to do the job to get the company profitable from day one. But it required a little slower. In other words, I had to go a little slower. I couldn't go there. I couldn't look at that 5-year horizon. Look, we did run profitably, and I had to be, as I said, the bank covenant says that I had to be profitable on an annual basis. And then the other issue is that I had to guarantee the loans of the company personally. And so I guaranteed the loans of the debts of the company up to $4.5 million for the first 7 or 8 years of the company's business. That's a lot of money. When I started the company, there was around less than 100 semiconductor companies, and then I went public in 1994. So it took a while, but we didn't go public because we had to. We went public because we wanted to, and there's a big difference. So today, there's over 1,400 semiconductor companies, whereas at the time I went public, there's less than 200. And so you can see the industry has grown significantly. We focus on the employee. We believe that if we help employees become better people, then they will make better employees. So I promise my people that I won't make you rich, but I will help you become a better father, mother, husband, wife, a good citizen. That's the focus of the company, is to help people become better people. And that's what you're going to learn about me in a minute when we talk about the lessons I have learned. So what have I learned? Number one, cash is king. You can't go out of business as long as you have money. But as soon as you run out of money, then you're in trouble. That's why only 20% of companies succeed, is because they run out of money. Or they have to go and dilute themselves to the point where they lose interest in the company. We do a lot of acquisitions at Micrel. We've acquired over 6 companies since we started. They didn't want to sell, they had to sell. Why? Because they lost sight of the fact that cash is king. The next thing I learned is that you have to think outside the box. So what that means is you got to go from the known to the unknown and a little bit further. And now, of course, I'm talking to a group that is very sensitive to that. As I was watching before when I came in, you were talking about, how do you do this properly, and you keep innovating and creating, and you have to go outside you got to have very entrepreneurial, creative thinking as you develop the surgery procedures that you use here at UCSF. The example I use is a young girl was watching her mother cook a Sunday roast. And she wanted to know why her mother cut an inch off of each end of the roast. And her mother says, I don't know, that's just the way my mother did it. So then she went one time visiting her grandmother, and she asked her, "Grandma, why do you guys cut off, or why does Mom cut off an inch side of each into the roast?" And her grandmother said, "Well, because that's the only size pan we had." And so what happens is that we get locked in to the way we used to do it. And that's called conventional wisdom. So we get locked in to that thinking process. Not only do you want to go to the unknown, you want to go beyond the unknown. The next thing is to have a very supportive spouse. And that's my wife. Without a supportive spouse, it's going to be difficult because you're going to go through these difficult times, these low points in your life, and when you do, you need somebody to keep you pumped up, and because your friends are going to tell you you're not going to succeed. That I learned is be able to run on empty. When you think you have no more gas in your tank, you can still keep going. And I'm going to combine that with this other one, is this: never give up. Failure is not an option. In 1994, when I was going public, in fact, I was in London at the time on the road show, taking our IPO, going out with our IPO. I noticed that when I was in the bathroom shaving, everything was blurry, and I just kept wiping the mirror, thinking that there's something wrong with the mirror. As it turned out, I had a retinal vein occlusion. For you doctors, you know what that is. That's like a stroke in your eye. And it caused me to go blind. And so I was in a very depressive state here. I just had taken the company public, and then to find out that I had this serious medical problem that caused me to go blind. So today I'm legally blind. And I was told at the time by the medical profession that there was no hope for me, that I was done for, that roll over and die. You just that's the way it goes. You're stuck. I was in a very depressive state, and didn't know what to do. Didn't know whether to just roll over and just forget it. But I decided to keep moving forward, not to let this become a showstopper for me in running the company. But I had to change things. I had to learn how to run the company when I couldn't see. Can you imagine, Dr. Davies, if you lost your vision, how would you feel about operating on a person's brain?
Well, I think, how would you feel about me operating your brain?
It's the same thing. It could happen to one of you. One of you could have a serious medical problem. Maybe you get a stroke. Maybe you end up with what I have, or some other debilitating disease. What do? Do you give up, or do you keep going forward? And so I learned a real lesson that we have a choice. We can either give up, or we can keep moving forward. And so I had to adapt. My memory is probably 10 times better than it was, maybe 100 times better than it was before I lost my vision. I'm also my personality changed. I became more sensitive to people. I began to understand and appreciate the difficulties that they run into. As Dr. Davies will tell you, I sing in the choir. I mean, I can't see the music, but I use a magnifier when I have to try to memorize it, and then I listen carefully to the piano or the organ to get my note, and I'm able to sing because he knows, because I sang with him in a choir. I also am learning to play the organ again. I am now starting over. I used to play the organ, and now I'm trying to learn how to do it. I also like to shoot, and that's something that takes extremely good vision to do. But I'm learning to shoot without vision, and I'm very good. I shoot a target 1,000 yards away, and I'm able to hold groups within 4 inches. And so you adapt. You just move forward in a way in which you compensate for the physical ailment or difficulty you have. And this is where you can be encouraging to your patients. Never give up on them. Never let them believe for 1 minute that they are going to have to just forego their quality of life. You need to build them up. The next is to begin. The rest is easy. And what I mean by that is that is that, you know, you have to start. When you, all of you were deciding to go into medicine, you know, you're talking about probably 8 years or 10 years of education and developing your career. That's a tough choice. And others, they say, well, we can't do it. I'm not going to spend that much time to try to become a doctor. And so they give up. But you decided to do it, but you had to begin. And if you begin, the rest is easy. And I learned that you know, I had all kinds of reasons why not to start the company, but I said, I'm going to begin. And as I began, one foot in front of the other, we did it. And it would just take that beginning is what was important. Willing listener is somebody who cares, somebody who's kind, who believes that they can help others. And you're the perfect audience for this. A willing listener is a kind, gentle, understanding person. And every person matters and counts. And if you're a willing listener, if you will take the time to show that person that you care, being gentle with them, you'll find that they'll heal quicker. If you love what you do, you won't work a day in your life. Don't let your job become a drudgery. If you really love your profession, work is not an issue. People say, because I'm old and I'll be 77 in September, they say, well, why don't you retire? The reason is because I love what I do. You know, if I retire, I'm not going to enjoy it as much. I enjoy going to work. I enjoy being engaged with people. You want to have a healthy lifestyle, because if you haven't got a healthy lifestyle, you're not going to be productive. Here's a picture of me on the right at 65 doing a handstand. So, you know, I don't know of any other 65-year-old that can do that. This is probably my favorite. Discipline is defined as doing what you don't like doing and doing it well. And that means there's projects you'll have, there are things in your occupation you'll have that you just detest doing. So what I do every day is I think of all the things that I don't want to do, and I do them first. One tends to put off things they don't want to do later, and it's called procrastination. All procrastination is putting off what you don't want to do. If you'll go do the things you don't want to do and do them, get them out of the way first, you'll find you'll have twice as much productivity that day. And you can never be too kind. That's another thing that I learned, especially after I lost my vision. You know, you can only give as much love as you're willing to receive. If you're kind to people, they'll be kind back to you. There's no such a thing as you can't be too kind. You know, don't be a risk manager, be a risk taker. If you're not a risk taker, you're not going to enhance your field, your profession. Now, I don't mean to try to put somebody at risk. Put yourself at risk. Take on challenges to yourself. Don't shy away from them because you don't want to look bad and you don't want to fail. Faster is not fast enough. This is a funny one. I'm going to become better today. I'm going to become happier. Those are relative terms. Fast is not fast enough. Faster is not fast enough. You have to move as fast as it takes to do the job and get it accomplished. Oh, getting the best use of your data. There are parameters that you look at when you evaluate a stroke victim. You look at numbness, at weakness in a particular extremity, slurred speech, other characteristics associated with a stroke victim, and usually about 4 or 5 parameters. And so, you know, when you come to evaluating data, it takes experience and intuition. How do I apply that knowledge I have in a proper way with that experience I've developed? And that's called intuition. So your gut tells you, you know, if that person's having a stroke, or no, that's not a stroke, that's a heart attack, or that's some other thing that person's having. Because time is of the essence. We have parameters that we look at to measure and monitor the industry. So our stroke victim for our industry is lead times, inventories, pricing, and equipment utilization. I have found that those 4 parameters best define the health of my particular business. With that, I'll let you ask some questions.
thank you for sharing that wealth of knowledge. Any questions from the audience?